All right, guys, welcome to week 10. This is our first date of the second half of the semester. I'm out of town, of course, so we are pre-recording this one. But remember that you will be live with me on Thursday at our usual time at 2 p.m. We'll be in Santa Fe where it will be 1 p.m. Let's look at what we're doing this week. By the way, I did get all of the zines that were submitted put into the grade book, so you should be able to look now at your grades and see what you have. When I get back, we'll talk a little bit about what we're looking for. But here's week 10. This week we're going to talk about the rise of electronica and EDM, the use of the synthesizer and the way that it was greeted by guitar-based rock. And then on Thursday when we're live, we'll talk about the birth of hip-hop in 1973. So this week what we're doing, we've got two quizzes, quiz 16 and quiz 17. You will have until Sunday night at midnight to take those, okay? I'm giving you the entire week since I will be out of town. I will leave those open. And then we're also going to get back into our writing, weekly writings as we prepare for our final project in December, which will be a podcast. So writing assignment number 6 is going to be a fairly light one here. Let me move this little thingy-mabobber so we can switch the screens to see it. Okay. Take a look at writing assignment number 6. Again, it is in module 10. So this is what I call our Stump the Band assignment. So for this assignment, you're going to introduce me to music that you don't think I know. And I do want you to know that I'm pretty well versed in this stuff. I know Little Pump and Tate McRae, as we've talked about. But in 100 words, without using I, me, we, you, us, or any form of first or second person, I want you to define what is most appealing about the cult artist that you think is most rare or obscure and what they add to their genre. Now again, do not pick Taylor Swift. I want you to pick somebody that is not, in your mind, super famous. So no Taylor Swift, no Lana Del Rey, not even any Gracie Abrams, no role model, nobody who's currently hot. Pick a band or an artist that you think the most people don't know about, and then be descriptive. Make sure you include album and song titles. Make sure again that you put song titles in quotation marks and album titles in italics. Okay? Quote at least one line. All right, so the goal is to teach your teacher something he doesn't already know, and that's a pretty big assignment, to be perfectly honest. So let's see what we can come up with. Again, 100 words. That's for Sunday night as well. Again, we're doing a little bit better on the midterms in that I think we only had 8 out of 40 not turn anything in. That's still very, very high for what should be the easiest class you're going to take in your college career. But, you know, I can't come to your room and make you do it. So, as we move on then, I want you to be thinking about the second half of the semester. The rest of our assignments that we do will be, for the most part, be focused on creating our podcast. So, without further ado then, let's go ahead and move into the lesson for today. Give me just a sec to pull it up and make sure I got the sound turned on. Let's go back to our first screen here. All right. So today we're going to talk about the rise of electronica, or what will eventually become known as EDM. At some point in the 90s was better known as rave music. In the 1970s and 80s, it was generally referred to as electronic music. And we're going to talk about the reason that mainstream rock and roll, all the guitar gods, really opposed the rise of it, and particularly for a long time hated synthesizers. So essentially, we're going to talk about the sound of the future, which is electronic music, versus the sound of the past, which is guitar-based rock and roll. Or another way to think of it is futurism versus primitivism. All right? There's a little Daft Punk head shield for you. All right, let's start with a meme about two Davids. On top we have David Gilmour, guitarist, and you see all the pedals and effects that go into giving him the distinct sound that he has. And then down on the bottom we have David Guetta. If you don't know who David Guetta is, we'll introduce you to him in a sec. But what he uses, is a jump drive. Now, this is a bit of a slag on David Guetta. What it's basically saying is David Gilmour, a rock guitarist, needs all this equipment, has all these devices by which he can make sound that he plays. And for David Guetta, it's all on a jump drive because it's all computer. So, here we have David Gilmour, guitarist for Pink Floyd, right? We played this song the other day in class, but I want you to look at all those pedals just as we go through this little guitar solo again. Now, the point of this meme, again, is that David Gilmour has to be a talented musician in order to make that sound. It helps that he has all this equipment. The meme is a little self-contradictory because what it's claiming there is he needs all this equipment. But I think the idea is that he uses all these devices to create different sounds that he is playing. Here, meanwhile, is David Guetta, who is, again, a French DJ, right? And music producer, and if you don't know him, this is what a typical concert of his looks like.
This is a brand new one with Bibi Rexha.
Now keep in mind, that's a pre-recorded song. So what is he doing is he's pushing all these buttons. He may be adding effects, he may be layering in other elements, but he is not the creator of that song. He's playing it for the entertainment. So if you've ever wondered what DJs do, at least for most people, it's not really clear. They're like conductors of orchestras. That's not the case because a lot of what they're doing is digital manipulation. We just don't see it happening because they're pushing buttons. But this prejudice against computer-driven music or electronic music comes down to this. This is a term that we've used, right? Rockism versus poptimism. Well, this is the derogatory side of rockism. The idea that musical snobbery, rockism is a type of musical snobbery that views rock music as superior and values music with authentic production values over modern manufactured electronic forms. In other words, if you're not a musician playing it, it isn't good. It doesn't have human heart. It doesn't have feel. And that's kind of the lie that we have to go against. I remember several years ago when David, the drummer from the Foo Fighters, Dave Grohl, made a comment about Danger Mouse. And he says all the guy does is wear a big head and push buttons. He had to apologize for that. Again, what we're talking about is the difference between the musician and the producer. Someone who creates sounds, someone who largely finds them and manipulates them. Another way we can approach this, if we come at it without the rockist attitude, is that disco or dance music of the mid-70s was the sound of the future. And nowhere do we look forward to this, maybe more than in a clip we'll play here in a second. By contrast, rock by the late 1970s was the sound of the past. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But basically, by the late 70s, rock music was no longer forward-looking, maybe art rock, maybe indie rock as it would develop, but even then it was pulling inspiration out of the past. Dance music looking toward the future. Here's the Jacksons in 1975 with a song called Dancing Machine. That's a dance that Michael Jackson popularized. He did not invent it, but he made it popular in the mid-70s, called the robot. And again, for rock purists, this robotics, the idea that music was robotic, was repellent to them. But for Michael Jackson and the Jacksons, now that song itself is not exactly electronica. You heard it's guitar driven. But the idea is that producers are beginning to incorporate all of these sounds in the future as a way of imagining what the world will look like. By contrast, this is what rock music looked like in 1977. We are in the Fat Elvis stage, right? The whole idea that rock has outlived its purpose, that it's grown to become a dinosaur, all right? Now, why did that prejudice come about? For one thing, there was a feeling by 1973 that rock had peaked, that rock was no longer forward-looking or progressive. And so you start to hear the phrase that rock is dead. There was actually a Who song called Long Live Rock, Rock is Dead. You may wonder why we say that when there's great bands out of this period, most notably Led Zeppelin. And again, fabulous musicianship, great songs, a string of 5 great albums in the 70s. But one thing we want to understand is that rock music had so entrenched itself in the idea of the primitive, of the sexual, of the blues, of the guitar as a substitute phallus, that Led Zeppelin represented a type of rock music, right? That, and I'm going to have to doctor this very quickly because we can't use the term we want to. It's a term called, well, we're going to use the phrase croc rock. We'll pretend it's in honor of the shoe, but hopefully you get the idea there. It's the idea that rock is all about, again, sort of the primitive, basic sexuality of music. And that's why rock got harder and harder into heavy metal and stuff like this. It was all about presenting the primitive side of humanity. Led Zeppelin also represented some pretty odious behavior that helps us understand why rock seemed to be died. I mean, it just seemed like bands had degenerated into absolute degeneracy. So there's a famous legend involving Led Zeppelin and a mud shark that was caught outside of a window. And quite honestly, there was really only one member of Led Zeppelin, the drummer, but it involved other people. They molested a teen fan with a fish. Now, that's really gross and disgusting, and today would be prosecuted as a crime. But one of the reasons that we say that the mid-70s was the era of croc rock was because all of these bands seemed to be taking advantage of their teenage fans. This was the era that saw the rise of the groupie, all right, the teenage fan. So just to give you a little taste of this history.
They would do drugs with Iggy Pop, make out with Mick Jagger in the bathroom, come back and have shots with John Bonham before witnessing a fight between Paul McCartney and John Lennon. They were young and hot and beloved among rock stars. They would spend their night on Los Angeles' Sunset Strip, going to different bars and clubs and hanging out with the elite of rock and roll music in the 70s. All of that while still going back to their parents' house at the end of the night and going to school the next day. So
this is all about, again, the exploitation of young fans. And again, this is one of the reasons that rock seemed to have died. It seemed to have no more political aspiration, no more forward-thinking exploration of sounds. It was all about the base primal instincts. All right? There's a couple ways that we can sort of measure the way that rock seemed to have died in this period of time. For one thing, major artists began recording albums of cover versions of older songs. So within the same week in 1973, David Bowie and then Brian Ferry, who was the leader of a band called Roxy Music, a great band, both released albums in which there was not new music. It was them recording songs from the 50s and 60s. Then a few months later, John Lennon, the final album that he released before he went into a 5-year retirement that ended with his assassination in New York City, recorded an album of all 50s songs. There was just this fascination with 50s music. Everybody started looking back. The Beatles, right? They had been broken up 3 years. For the first time ever, they released 2 greatest hits albums, known as the Red Album and the Blue Album. One from the first half of the career, one from the second. And people were like, well, if the Beatles are repackaging their stuff, then rock has truly died. Here's a really amazing example. In 1974, the Beach Boys came out of nowhere. They had not been on the charts in 8 years. They had not had a top 10 hit in 8 years. Their albums had not been making the charts. They released an album of all of their early surfing songs, and it went to #1 on the charts in October 1974. So, you know, there was just this fascination with oldies. This was the sort of second era in which oldies but goodies songs began to take off. The difference was oldies now included what today we call classic rock, or rock from the 70s. Another way that we can look at it is soundtracks. There was a hit movie in 1973 called American Graffiti that was all about growing up in the early 60s, and every single song on it came from the late 50s, early 60s. Could have been part of those Art Laboe oldies but goodies soundtracks. And again, it was a huge hit. American Graffiti was so popular, it helped establish a radio genre called the oldies but goodies format. Here's an ad for it.
Hey kids, the next song is dedicated to Butchie, Chico, Wimpy, Stanley, Franny, and Annie, the stars of the new movie, The Lords of Flatbush.
Do 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 do. The Lords of Flatbush is a movie. Do 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 do. About how life was in the 50s.
That's actually a cult movie called The Lords of Flatbush. It's remembered today because it introduced 2 actors, one Sylvester Stallone and the other Henry Winkler, who would basically play the same character except renamed as the Fonz on Happy Days. And that movie was popular in part because, again, it told people in the 70s to look back 20 years to the 50s to supposedly appreciate how much simpler life was back then. So the whole idea of 50s nostalgia really took root in the mid-70s. You know, the Rocky Horror Picture Show just a couple weeks ago celebrated its 50th anniversary. And it's another example of what we call the affectionate pastiche, or the parody of 50s music. Grease is probably the best known example. Grease was a Broadway play starting in the early 70s and famously made into a movie, a very popular movie, set in the late 50s. And it was also very much cleaned up for the movie. The theme song, by the way, was actually a disco song because it was released in 1978. But if you've ever seen Grease, songs like Grease Lightning, the big hits off that album are all sort of pastiches or parodies of 50s music. Here's a little clip from the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Don't get strung out by the way I look. Don't judge a book by its cover. I'm not much of a man by the light of day, but by night I'm one hell of a lover. I'm just a sweet transvestite.
So everything about that song is kind of a 50s parody. Hopefully you heard the little piano come in, playing a little Fats Domino, the sax squealing in there. Again, it's making fun of it because it's saying beneath all that rock and roll machismo was the heart of a sort of transvestite figure. But the idea here is, again, that we are looking for new music in the sound of the past. Maybe our best example of an artist who reflected the sound of the past is this guy. May 24th, 1974, there was a rock critic named John Landau who publishes a review with the lead, I Saw Rock and Roll's Future, and its name is. Anybody want to guess who was supposedly the face of the rock and roll future in 1974? He's got a movie coming out about himself in about 10 days. That's John Landau right there. It was this guy, Bruce Springsteen, who in that picture looks like a scruffy dude from the 50s. Springsteen, and there's an ad that's sort of celebrating that quote. It became the way that Springsteen first broke big. Springsteen is great. He would go on to do much better stuff than some of his 70s stuff. But the whole idea was he was rock and roll's future, not because he was doing anything new, but because he was part of a new generation that was embodying the spirit of the 1950s. Here's a song off his album, 1975 album, just celebrated its 50th birthday. The album's called Born to Run. The song is called Night. This is a song that he actually, as recently as 2 years ago, was opening his concerts with. All right, that is the sound of the 50s. Again, you have that same sort of propulsive guitar, but the sound of those pianos just doing that da-da-da-da-da-da and the squealing saxophone. So Springsteen's sound was by no means progressive or forward-looking. It was bringing into the 70s what everybody thought was rock's most important elements, the sense of drive, the passion, the power, the energy. There's one way that Bruce Springsteen was progressive, however, and that had to do with one of the great album covers of all time, Born to Run, the way that he and his saxophonist, Clarence Clemons, behaved on stage. They had this kind of creative partnership going where at the end of a concert they would actually kiss on the lips. That was supposed to be a male gesture of friendship between two men. And this is what Springsteen says in his biography. It wasn't about showmanship or rejecting bigots or anything. It was just damn right. That was one of the loves of his life, music, and damn right he was going to kiss him on stage. We remade the city, shaping it in kind of a place where our friendship and our love for one another wouldn't have been such an exceptional thing. That bottom quote is about Springsteen, by the way. So the whole idea here is Springsteen was progressive in the sense that he embodied this new masculinity. It was the rock and roll attitude of the 50s. But if there is anybody in rock and roll who is not crock rock, who is a physical performer, it's probably Springsteen. All right, so we get to this era where the idea is rock is dead, long live rock. Where does rock go? And the answer is to go back to the basics: guitars, drums, bass. We see this maybe most viscerally in punk music, which began to take off about 1974, really exploded in 1975. Punk primitivism revels in three-chord simplicity, rejects sophistication in favor of visceral appeal. It's in your face. Now, there's different versions of that. There's kind of cartoon punk, which is what we associate with the band the Ramones. Ramones did a lot of fun songs, but they never did a ballad, for example. And once you've heard one Ramones song, you've basically heard every single one of them. They were so kind of cartoony that they actually made a movie at the end of the 70s, and you get a sense of how kind of corny their act was.
It's 1980. Welcome to Rock and Roll High School.
Rock and roll high school?
So that was a high school movie back in the late 70s, early 80s. That song itself is a song from the early 60s called Do You Want to Dance? And all they did was speed it up and make it louder. So that was kind of the mantra of the Ramones, cartoon punk. There was also a lot more visceral punk. The band that really emblematized the idea that rock was in your face and violent was a group called the Sex Pistols from England. And they had songs like God Save the Queen, She Ain't No Human Being, and I Am the Antichrist, which again, that's not going to win you a lot of middle of the road fans. You're not going to be playing the Super Bowl singing I Am the Antichrist. Here's what one of their group members looked like. So you see there Sid Vicious, their bass player, who's wearing a Nazi swastika. The whole idea was that punk rock was nihilistic, right? Primitive, nihilistic, there's no hope for the future. We're just going to sort of flail about on stage, sort of protesting, not political protest, but just a sort of protest against the meaninglessness of it all. Now, Sid Vicious actually went on to kill his girlfriend and overdose on heroin. So it's not exactly a bright future embodying that kind of punk rock. But there is also another type that is more long-lasting, and that's art punk. This is music that takes an avant-garde approach to rock, makes it more modernistic, more experimental, more unconventional elements. One artist that really emblematizes this for us is Patti Smith. She was a poet before she was a singer. And she is someone who took that spirit of 1950s rock, but in a sense made it very literary. We'll come back to her with one of her most controversial 70s songs. But the band that I think people really remember the most is the group Talking Heads, because they went into funk and brought in a lot of African black elements. I don't have a music clip of them, but if you've ever heard the song, Burning Down the House or some of their 80s hits, they're very off kilter. They're very weird. They have that art rock spirit, but they're still using a lot of basic primitive elements. They're not using at this point in the late 70s a lot of synthesizers. All right, so let's talk about the attitude of guitar versus synthesizer. You can think of this as the alien versus predator of popular music. On the one hand, that's what guitar-based rock is supposed to look like. Again, I keep saying this, but it's the idea that the guitar is a substitute phallus. You as a singer are wielding your virility as you perform. So we have, guys that have to keep showing us how big it is. We get 2 guitars in one. Then we get this guy from Cheap Trick, where we got 4 guitars or 5 guitars built on one. When he used to wear that thing, it was about 70 pounds. All right. The guitar, or the synthesizer by contrast, is a machine. And in order to create the sounds in the 70s, you needed a big console like this. This is a guy named Keith Emerson, who was part of a progressive rock band, a prog rock band called Emerson, Lake and Palmer. He tried to be like the rock god of the synthesizer. And what he would do is he would play in front of all of these consoles. But he had this whole shtick where he had like a lot of rock and roll moves. At one point he would jump over the piano. He had kind of a fake piano off to the side, and he would pull it on top of himself. But it never really quite broke through in the way that the guitar as a stage style did. As you see, these synthesizers back then are just way too cumbersome to really wield as again, as a surrogate phallus. All right? So when we talk about the history of the synthesizer or the history of electronic music, we really begin with this guy, a guy named Robert Moog. Now you'll often hear his name pronounced as Moog, but today they've corrected it and it's Moog. He was the guy who invented the first operable synthesizer. Interestingly enough, he got into electronic music because his father built theremins back in the 40s. And if you remember theremins, that was that electronic sound wave manipulation tool that the Beach Boys put on the end of Good Vibrations. So beginning in the 1960s, Robert Moog created something called the Moog synthesizer. This is not a computer. This is an electronic machine that makes sound through the manipulation, through the electrical manipulation of sound waves. We would call this analog because it's pre-digital, all right? The machines were very weird, very hard to operate, very cumbersome. So in order to go into business and actually make a profit, he had to invent something called the Mini Moog, which basically, shrunk down his computer, or not his computer, but his synthesizer, so it could be taken on the road. So these are examples of Mini Moogs. And you will often see these if you watch clips of bands performing in the 70s. The first artist who really made an album with a Moog synthesizer came in 1968 when an artist named Wendy Carlos released an album in which they interpreted classical music on a Moog synthesizer. All right. Now, Wendy Carlos is kind of famous because she was one of the first openly transsexual people. She was born Walter Carlos, became Wendy Carlos. But important for our purposes is how the Moog synthesizer sounded. So this is off the album Switched on Bach, and this was a very popular album in the 60s. Now, that's what sound wave manipulated sounds resemble. Squelches, belches, blips, bleeps, bloops. A very cumbersome instrument, but people were exploring the ways that electrical machines could create sounds. The first rock band to feature a Moog synthesizer on an album, weirdly enough, you would not expect this, was the group The Monkees, right? Who are often criticized for being kind of a TV band. But they had a song in 1967 that sounded like this. Now that's a psychedelic song, not a great song, but an interesting song. And if you heard all those squelches and blips at the beginning, that's the Moog synthesizer. The drummer there, Mickey Dolenz, happened to buy one and play around with it, so they incorporated it into the song. Think of early Moog synthesizers as sound effect machines. That's what they really were. And a lot of rock artists were very, very hesitant to incorporate them in songs because they did not think the sounds that they made sounded natural. Okay? The best place to understand where the synthesizer was incorporated into rock was through prog rock or progressive rock of the 70s, like Emerson, Lake and Palmer, like the great band Rush that just announced last week that it was going to get back together for its 50th anniversary tour. All right? A lot of people hate prog rock. It's sometimes called the whitest music ever because it's an attempt to make music that is rhythmically complex, that approaches the complexity of classical music. It's not necessarily symphonic, has a lot of heavier elements, but it's often done in time scales that you can't find the beat to. But more importantly, when these artists used the Moog synthesizer, the sounds the keyboards would generate were something like this. There's Keith Emerson with the Moog in concert. So this is a Emerson, Lake and Palmer song called Lucky Man. And this is what the Moog synthesizer solo sounded like in 1974. So again, the notes are being bent not on a guitar string, but the use of a dial. Off there to the left, you can see those little white dials in the upper corner of the Mini Moog, where you bend the notes by manipulating the sound. And again, a lot of critics just hated this sound because it was machine made. It wasn't a product of musicianship, but of electronic manipulation. A lot of bands saw the value of synthesizers, but really struggled because the machines were just not up to technological snuff. There's a very famous story about a Who song. It's called Baba O'Reilly. I know you've heard it. It's in every movie these days, and it gets played all over the place. But the leader, the guy that wrote Tommy, that we talked about in our rock opera class, he was trying to use synthesizers in order to create sound patterns as a kind of a backdrop for heavy rock. The problem was he couldn't create the sound he wanted. So out of frustration, what he took to doing was using just a home organ like you see right there that you may have grown up with in your house, and he would press the buttons until he found a sound he liked. And in one case, he started playing the marimba rhythm, which just creates a sort of echo and a bit of a wave pattern in the sound. And that's how they came up with this particular sound. That little audio part plays in the background of the entire song. Pete Townsend told people for years that what he did was he collected data from fans and programmed it into a computer, and the computer spat out these electronic sounds. And then about 40 years later, he admitted no. What he did was he had a home organ that he that he fooled around with until it produced that sound. So computers were not really up to snuff enough to create more than bleeps and glips and glops and gloops, the sound effects. Another guy that we talked about in our last class that played a huge role in the development of the synthesizer was Stevie Wonder, and he partnered up with Toronto's expanding head band Tonto. These two guys, Malcolm Cecil and Robert Margolief, we saw part of the documentary about them in our last class. But again, that's Tonto right there. A huge, almost formidably techno console that looks like a space machine. And again, you're patching sound, you're patching chords into various amp holes in order to try to create certain effects. And they would just play around on this forever, trying to find certain sounds that they would then chase into making songs. One of the most famous examples, you'll know this song if you're a Red Hot Chili Peppers fan, but one of the most famous songs that they did using Tonto was this one. Again, the whole point here is that you're getting sounds, not as acoustic sounds, but as squelches, as little blips and bleeps and bloops. And again, I want to emphasize that rock critics, by and large, hated synthesizers because they were considered unnatural. They made sounds that sounded like you'd just eaten at Taco Bell, like your stomach was having a tough time. Europeans were also doing a lot with synthesizers. We talked about this guy, Giorgio Moroder, as a creator of disco. And again, there he is in his prime. It's interesting because he started off trying to rip off the Beatles. I love this goofy little clip of him. He was never going to make it as a rock star or even a pop star, just a little derivative. So what he did was he got into the technological side. Here is a news clip of him from the late 70s when he was really at his peak.
Take the human touch, combine it with a digital computer, and you've got composer-producer Giorgio Moroder, plugged in, turned on, and creating musical magic from thin air and solid-state electronics. From his disco hits for Donna Summer to his Academy Award for the score of Midnight Express, Moroder's an innovator, performing in his favorite place, a cluttered studio.
Now again, listen to all those little sounds. I mean, those, again, I have to stress, are not natural. They're squelches, they're blips, they're bloops, all right? And this is what one of his most famous innovations with the synthesizer sounded like. Again, it's a Donna Summer disco song, but I want you to listen to the keyboards. Now that was high tech back then, and notice how they're putting the sound waves behind the video. But if you hear those rhythms of that keyboard that's going da 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 da, that is not a keyboard player playing 30-second notes. That is, the rhythm is created by the manipulation of the sound wave in a certain patch, a certain electric patch that is programmed into the the electrical circuitry. So all of these songs are electrical blips and bloops. And again, I want to emphasize that all these sounds are pre-digital. Okay, this is not computer stuff yet. The other main influence in electronica in the 1970s was a German group called Kraftwerk, and they basically invented a whole form of electronica that was very popular in Germany. Has a kind of derogatory name. It's called Krautrock. It's a broad genre of experimental rock developed in West Germany in the late 60s and early 70s, psychedelic, avant-garde, electronic music. And the whole idea here is, again, is this was almost a performance act group, because their whole idea was these computers depersonalize us. So this is what Kraftwerk sounded like at the peak of their influence, circa 1975. So the whole point here is that they're making this electronic music and they're acting like robots playing it. And that was a way of saying to the rock and roll people, well, if you think this is robotic, we'll be robots, because we're not going to just settle for the primitivism of rock and roll. Now, by the late 70s, a lot of bands figured out a way to integrate kind of a rock sound with synthesizers. And so you get hits like this. Again, very futuristic, but even the bass guitar doing that riff, ba-da-da-dum, ba-da-da-dum, that's done on a mini Moog synthesizer, a mini Moog synthesizer. So the whole idea is we're going to place all the guitars with these synthesizers and have different sound textures. All right? The most influential synthesizer ever was really the first one that demonstrated the ability of a digital or computer synthesizer. It was not the first computer synthesizer, but it was the first one to really have a huge influence. It's called the Fairlight CMI. Very important influence on late 70s and 80s music. Look at it. It looks like a computer your parents or grandparents might have had, right down to the little pen that you used on the machinery. The Fairlight CMI was the first sampling synthesizer. It could record sounds and then map them across the keyboard in different pitches. So all of a sudden I wouldn't just play notes, but I could play the notes as a recorded sound effect. I could go into nature and take the sound of a burp and program it in and use that, and it would give me that sound in every note on a keyboard. All right, invented by two Australian guys. Very expensive for the time, okay? This is an example of what people began to do with the sample, one particular sample that the Fairlight CMI made useful.
He screeches, smashes, drips, and rotary dials. And then there was the orchestra hit.
Ironically, the orchestra hit was a complete accident, which was sampled by me. I just happened to have a vinyl recording of the Stravinsky Firebird Suite nearby when I was messing around. That orchestra hit, which I think was right at the beginning of one of the tracks. And I thought, oh, that's a good sound.
Peter called the sound Orc 2 and put it on an 8-inch floppy disk full of those other stock sounds.
And obviously, a lot of people took a liking to it.
Yeah, just hit me. Just hit the phone and hit me. Just get on down and hit me. That bot just getting so funky now, hit me.
Planet Rock was the first smash hit record to use Orc 2. In the first 2 seconds of the song, it's used 5 times.
So the thing that you can know immediately about Planet Rock is that 50,000 people copied it.
That 8-bit orchestra hit started popping up in all sorts of songs.
Last night I drank.
So again, they took one burst of sound off a record, sampled it into a synthesizer, and all of a sudden that became one of the dominant sounds of 1980s music. It's called the orchestra hit. You still hear it in 80s inspired music today. Now, a lot of musicians, again, hated the synthesizer. So if you've ever heard of Phil Collins, this became very commonplace in rock and roll, and it's kind of, again, a rockist attitude. This is the album that has the famous song "In the Air Tonight" on it. But if you, and you may know it from this meme, this got a little language in it, so sorry. That's the one that has the drum song that goes doo-doo, 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 right? That everybody loves to imitate. You always see people falling down to that exact rhythm or whatever. But the important thing about No Jacket Requirement is on the cover, or on the back cover, it had this statement: there is no Fairlight CMI on this record. In other words, a lot of musicians started bragging about the fact that they didn't use computers on their albums. The first album that was ever completely produced on a Fairlight CMI, you should know. It's an album by a British singer called Hounds of Love, maybe most famous for this song that Stranger Things made famous about 3 years ago. Running Up That Hill, again, made famous by Stranger Things a few years ago. But the important thing about that is every sound on the album is created on that Fairlight CMI. That drum pattern, that is not a live drummer. That is a sound that is created and then played in that particular rhythm. That little boop, boop, boop. Those notes are not a guitar or a violin. They are digitally manipulated sounds. So this album demonstrated that you could make an entire album without a single human musician playing. All right? And largely because of Stranger Things, she just got into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame a few years ago. This is what the Fairlight was directly responsible for the early 80s sound of what's called the synth pop movement. A lot of it was led by British bands such as Depeche Mode or that's them today. So this is kind of what they sounded like. Now, that's a song called I Just Can't Get Enough. But the important thing about there is, I hope you caught, that there is no drummer, no guitar player, no bass player. Every artist on that song is playing the rhythm or the notes or the accompaniment on a synthesizer. So this is the British pop synth sound. Another famous example of that, Drake sampled this song a few years ago. When he did this song.
In this six-side town, a dead-end world, the East End boys and West End girls.
He had to work out a deal with the Pet Shop Boys because he did not get permission to use that lyric or melody. But this is what...
In this six-side town, a dead-end world,
where'd it go?
The East End boys and West End.
But the Pet Shop Boys themselves were huge innovators in the synth pop sound. So the compositions of bands suddenly changed. You no longer had drummers. You had keyboard engineers like the guy in the background. You might have a singer out front and a guy in the back that is working all kinds of digital tools in order to create the sounds or at least play the accompaniment along. Another example of what happens and how the synthesizer became important. This is Queen's A Night at the Opera, just celebrated its 50th anniversary. This is a song that has Bohemian Rhapsody on it. And there's the inside of the album cover. Interestingly enough, one of the things it says there is no synthesizers. Again, bands, rock bands, were emphasizing that they were not using electrical tools or computers in order to create sounds that they could not play themselves. All right? But a funny thing happened between the 70s and the 80s. Queen became the most synth-driven band, rock band ever. Part of that was because when the 80s came, they really did not have much of a direction to go in. They had exhausted the sound of hard rock. So their first attempt came out like this. Fun little pop song. When I was in bar bands, we used to play that all the time. People loved to dance to it. But it's an Elvis ripoff. There's nothing original or innovative about it. It's a straight 50s callback. But Queen, thanks largely to Freddie Mercury, began moving in an electronic direction. And they made a video that I think kind of captures the feel of the synth, of the guitar being sent off and electronic music being embraced. This is from their 1980 song. Both of these are on the same album. The song is called The Game, as is the album. And this is the middle section of the video.
Play the game, play the game, play the game, play the game.
No, that's very cheesy, where he takes the guitar from him and then throws it back just in time for the guitar solo. But that backward bit of imagery there where Freddie Mercury leaps backward and they hear that sound of the whoosh, that's Queen embracing the synthesizer. And you can almost read this video as them trying to decide what direction do we go into. The next album that Queen made was the most divisive one in their career because they went total electronic sound. They had a song called that went like this. Should mention it's called Body Language, and it's called, one critic said, a piece of funk that isn't fun. You can understand why people just scratch their heads when they released that song, Body Language. People didn't know what to make of it because it was all electronic. And Queen fans, that really ruined Queen's career for a few years. So there was a danger in going all synthesizer too early. Let me give you another example of the prejudice that people have against keyboards. By the mid-'80s, you could not be in a band and not use synthesizers. So the most famous example of a rock band using synthesizers is Van Halen. And Van Halen, of course, was named after the most influential guitar player of the late 70s and 80s, Eddie Van Halen, who died just 5 years ago. If you know anything about Van Halen, you probably know their most famous song that goes like this. That's a song that's completely driven by a synthesizer riff that Eddie Van Halen came up with. The rest of the band did not want to cut a song to that, but it was good that they did because that was their biggest hit ever, and it fit perfectly in 1984. However, even 40 years later, hard rock people hate that song, really detest the synthesizers, to the point where you can go online and you can see how fans have remixed the song to take all the synthesizer out. It's a very interesting experiment because it sounds like a completely different song.
Me down. You got it tough.
So it almost works as a rock song. It's a little empty there up front. But you notice that, again, how those visuals say that this guy just hated the keyboard sound in this song and wants to make it a rock song. So there remains a prejudice against the synthesizer in rock and roll as late as the mid-'80s. All right, finally, I mentioned the other day that when disco, after the disco demolition night riot of 1979, disco did not die. It went back underground into gay clubs, and it became what we today called house music. Beyonce made a whole album that was a tribute to house music, the album before Cowboy Carter. But house is a genre. Again, it's got the disco 4 on the floor beat, typical tempo of 120 beats per minute. It was created by the guy that we saw in that Bee Gees documentary, largely driven by Vince Lawrence. And these were just kids that were making up beats and using primitive computer keyboards. All right. It all started at a gay club called the Warehouse. There were several different DJs that created it. They used electronic beats in order to produce songs. It was largely, again, DJ driven. That's a guy called Freddie Knuckles, who is started out as a disco DJ, but became is most associated with house music. And the first original song, the music was by Vince Lawrence. It was a song called On and On by one of Vince Lawrence's friends named Jesse Saunders. Here's a clip from a documentary about house music.
No longer about recycling old disco. House was something new, something fresh. It just wasn't on vinyl until On and On.
Jesse Saunders, On and On. The very first house record. To this day, I've had people offer me $1,000 for this, if not more.
I had noticed that all of the girls thought that he was such a cute guy DJ. And he said he was singing, so I thought I'd put him in front. I thought that, okay, you have a band, you got a cute guy up front, heartthrob for the girls. You got the musicians taking care of business behind the scenes.
So Vince, Vince is the type of person, he's just Mr. Information.
So these two friends made a huge hit record, the first house dance song, house music dance song, just off keyboards. All right. So there is dance music sort of underground in the 80s. That's very important. All right. So keep in mind as we move into the 80s that music gets more and more electronic, and it is the sound of the future because it's using technology to create new sounds. And people argue that rock and roll sort of petered out in the 70s in part because it could never come up with a vision of the future using the guitar. So let's go ahead and get in today's quiz. Again, you got 10 minutes for 5 questions, very easy questions. The word of the day is Moog, M-O-O-G with a capital M. All right, I'm going to stop sharing. And we'll just, again, reiterate that for this week, you take this quiz and Thursday's quiz before Sunday at midnight, and then writing assignment number 6 will be due then too. All right, so we'll see you live on Thursday at our regular time at 2 o'clock. I'll be beaming in from Santa Fe. So we'll see you then. All right, bye-bye.